5 seconds to go. Start. So, when we look at India's prospect, one part of it is what are we going to be doing with our own lives? We want to move towards a developed society. But if I were to look at India in the world, a large part of how the world would regard India is very much dependent on actually how business is doing in India. Now, as I pointed out, Viksit Bharat is clearly the goal for Amrit Kal, and we very much hope that this decade has actually laid a very strong foundation for that to happen. So let me rewind a bit and actually see what has changed in the last decade. Why is it that we even have the confidence to talk about becoming a developed nation? I would put it in about 4 or 5 broad baskets. One is that through this decade, in many ways, we have made it easier to do business. It will never be a done deal. It will always be work in progress. We can never sit back on whatever achievements there are. But the fact is, if you look back over the last 5 years, then look back over the previous 5 years, and then perhaps the previous 5 or 10, there is no question today that there has been a very marked improvement in the climate for business in making it easier to do business in this country. The second, which is actually a broader endeavor, it's something which the Modi government calls ease of living. Ease of living is actually how do we, I would say, debureaucratize the society, that in the many things that we want in our daily lives, many things which all of you need to actually do more business in this country, to invest more easily, to produce more easily, to sell more easily. How do we make the life of the average citizen easier, less burdened, less regulated in a cumbersome way? And of course, the example which I am most familiar with and which all of you have experienced is the ease with which today you get passports. So, if you look back at what a passport meant 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I do not think you even want to remember. So, my point is, if you look at what the government is doing to cut red tape, to simplify regulations, to make public services more entitlement driven, that government does services not because it is doing a favor to its citizens, it is doing services because that is the entitlement of the citizen from the government. And in many ways, that kind of belief is today trying to transform the manner in which the government responds to the expectations of the people. The third one, and I saw that briefly referred to in the clip before my talk, is actually what has long been the bane of our economy, and that is the infrastructure. So, the impact which Gati Shakti is making, the whole idea, because one of our problems is we are actually, even by global standards, we are an extraordinarily siloed society, siloed bureaucracy, that it is not just the left hand and the right hand, one finger or one hand does not know what the other finger is doing. So, what we would have is, whether it is the railway, the power, the road, the water, the optical fiber, the airport, these each one was done as an autonomous, sometimes even independent activity, sometimes as a result working at cross purposes and actually not using resources optimally. So, the idea actually of bringing it all together, of having a kind of a master plan, not just a master plan, a coordinated effort to do that, that to my mind is actually an endeavor which has done well in the last few years, and as that gains more traction, I think we are going to see the results of that. A fourth basket I would put to you is the digital basket. The digital basket, because this term, digital public infrastructure, if in this year there are a few terms which have, I would say, come into vogue in my business. One is the voice of the global south, and one of them is digital public infrastructure. The idea that governments use digital backboards really to, even with limited resources, cover a very large part of the population by doing it with all the efficiency which digital instruments can offer. If we look back, I mean, all of you are familiar with the campaigns, the initiatives, the yojanas of the last decade. You can reel them off one by one. आवास योजना, गरीब कल्याण योजना, अन्न योजना, मुद्रा, जल जीवन मिशन, स्वच्छ भारत, स्किल इंडिया, डिजिटल इंडिया. There is a range of this. Now, what is the common element? What is the foundation? Why is it today that the government? Because if you look at these campaigns, just the volume, the number of people covered in these campaigns, individual campaigns have beneficiaries which run not just into the population of large countries, they are actually sometimes continents. But today, the Anna Yojana, we give 5 kilograms of food to 800 million people every month. That is the population of two decent sized continents. That under Mudra, you pay money into about 400 million beneficiaries. If one looks at even something like Awas Yojana, building houses, which is quite complicated. In the last 10 years, in urban and rural areas, we have built 40 million houses, which at 4.8% average per family is almost 200 million. It is 190 million people. 190 million people is like housing 1.5 times the size of Japan in the course of a decade. So look at the scale of what we are doing today. That scale, and we saw that more sharply demonstrated during COVID. And because it happened so quickly and so efficiently to all of you, it was very naturally. I do not mean it in a bad way, but you all took it for granted. If you had gone around the world, you would have seen countries who are sitting on mounds of vaccines, who are not able to vaccinate people, their own population. If they vaccinated them, they did not know how to certify it. If they certified it, they did not know how to call them back for the second shot or the third shot. Stop.